sounds like there was a structure, but the people that you worked with made a huge difference in your ability
Absolutely.
to actually turn a failure into success.
Yep.
And again, you listened, right? You guys clearly did your homework in terms of having a hypothesis, listening to the market, gluing it together into a go-to-market strategy.
Yep.
But there was this willingness to sort of rip it apart and rebuild it again.
Yeah. I'm never frightened of failure, Greg, but I'm always frightened that people don't learn from it. I think that's the biggest issue with failure in any business, is that the immediate reflex action in business is, all right, whose throat do I choke for the failure, right? I mean, who's responsible for this? I mean, who's responsible is usually a myriad of people, because it usually wasn't one person who made all the decisions. The real question is, how did we end up here? What did we miss? What did we assume that wasn't correct? What data did we rely on that maybe wasn't validated? Or what data did we not bother to get before we made a decision? I want to underline the importance of failure leading to success.
Yes.
And I think this is...
Which, by the way, if I can interrupt you, a large corporation that enters a market with 1.5 billion consumers, is there room for failure?
You have to make it. I mean, that's your leadership
How does
role.
it work?
Well, that's where the leader has to stand up and own that. If I'm in that market, that's my responsibility to give permission to fail, because ultimately that's going to lead to greater success. It's a function of leadership, right?
Yeah.
To be able to fail, you have to be able to given the space to fail.
Today, I speak with Gary Tickle, former CEO and president at Nestle Nutrition North America. What stayed with me was Gary's commitment to creating a culture of experimentation in marketing teams. But to do that, everyone in a marketing department has to have the permission to fail. From Delve Deeper, this is Narrow Lanes. Gary Tickle, thank you so much for joining me today on Narrow Lanes.
Thank you for the invitation, Greg.
Talk to me about your career. You obviously have been working for huge multinational corporations. Nestle was one of them. How did you get started?
I grew up in country Australia, in the bush, as we would call it. I was on a holiday going with some friends to the coast, and a university had an open day. I went along to have a look, and they had a business course that they were offering up. It was heavily sponsored by the Australian Air Force at the time, so it had good government backing and a lot of high-level operational people who were running the course.
Okay.
So I put my name down, thought I'll give it a year and see what happens, and the rest is history. I stayed in business, but I did a mix of operational and HR management. I did two majors because I thought it's fine to understand how a business works, but you also need to understand how people work, because you have to run a business through people. So I did both.
Was there one class that you took in university in the context of business that was an early indicator of something that you truly were passionate about? And I'll give you an example. Like for me, I had one class that was managerial accounting.
Yes.
And I had an A+ in it, and I loved finding patterns in data. And I wish someone told me back then that this was an indicator of where I could go in my career. It took me years to actually realize how I can use that skill in business.
Yeah.
Did you have something like that in university?
I think one that stood out for me was in industrial and organizational design. And it was run by an ex-military guy who had gone on to become a magistrate in Papua New Guinea. He'd actually been up there trying to bring law and order to Papua New Guinea. And he was an interesting mix, because he had both the disciplined elements of the military ingrained in him, but he was a people person. And he was an interesting guy because he would constantly challenge us to think about, it's fine to have design, it's fine to understand structure and strategy, but ultimately you'll deliver all of this through people. And so the connection of these two things will be critical in your success, no matter what you do in your career. This was something he used to instill in us. He said, if you want to have a disciplined military, you still do it through your people. You have structure, but you have to have respect and values and principles around how you manage the people. And it stuck with me, because I thought, well, throughout my career, if I think about the things I've worked on and worked with, changing cultures, having to absorb new cultures and understand them and respect them, that's a fundamental learning that I've been able to carry through whatever I've done, and realize that these two things both have a role.
It sounds like that ultimately was connected to leadership, fair?
Sure.
I mean, I know we're fast forwarding now, probably 10 plus years.
Yeah.
But I find that running a division or a business is, to your point, so much about the mechanics of the structure and the processes. But if you forget about the people element, you probably are going to not win, or it's going to be hard to win.
Yeah, or your people won't win, right? You won't get the most out of your people. At the end of the day, you want them to succeed because they're going to be the secret of your success as a leader. And if they don't realize their potential, then it's probably likely that your company also won't reach its full potential.
Now, if I fast forward, you had a successful, I think, almost 15 years at Nestle, different
over 20,
roles.
actually.
20 years.
Over 20, yeah.
So 2 decades, different locations. How did you get in? And what did that journey look like?
So I joined as a graduate trainee. I had a number of job offers from different companies, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was very fortunate that I had a family connection to a gentleman by the name of James Strong, who's since passed away. But he was at that time the chairman and CEO of Qantas. And he'd had a very successful career leading the biggest legal firm in Australia. And he went on to be chairman of Woolworths, the biggest retailer in Australia. So my father organised for me to have a phone call with him. And I just rang him and said, look, these are the things that are on the table. I really don't know what to do. And he said, well, if you want to join a sleeping giant who's about to undergo fundamental change and really re-engineer itself from the ground up, I would join Nestle, because I know people in there in senior management and I can see changes coming. It's been around a long time, it's very well respected, but in a way it's been a little bit stuck in the past, and new leadership are going to change that. So you have a chance to jump on the coattails of that and learn from it. And that was the reason I chose Nestle.
I really like how he phrased it, the sleeping giant.
Yeah.
That, in a really elegant way, both addresses the size of the organization, but also the potential.
Yeah, potential. That's exactly right.
At the end of that 20-year period, what role were you in? What did you have to do to get to that role?
So my last role was here in the States, an operational role. So I was the president and CEO of the Nestle nutrition business for North America, coming from the previous role where I was a global head of the strategic business unit for infant nutrition, where we had over 100 countries around the world where we had strategic oversight. We were basically stewards of the brand for the business across the globe.
It sounds like you had both a oversight over almost 100 plus markets. So you could look at every market specifically and across markets, right?
Yes.
I'm sure there were differences and similarities.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then was North America just you owning a specific business unit?
Yes, that was owning a business
and having
unit.
complete accountability for all the results?
Yep, P&L top to bottom, correct.
Was that a tough shift from a more strategic role to the operational role?
It wasn't, Greg, because I'd come from operational to strategic and then back to operational. So prior to being in Switzerland in headquarters, I was in South Asia. I was based in India for 4 years, where I had the South Asia region complete responsibility for the infant nutrition business, which was India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, and the Maldives. It's like, I don't know, 1.5 billion people. But it was a fabulous experience, 4 years of
so
adventure.
Owning a market with 1.5 billion potential consumers, that sounds pretty amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing. So you asked how to get there. Well, it was successive roles of different experiences building up to that. And I think ultimately putting my hand up to take new risks and challenges. I came from New Zealand to India. I don't think it could be much more different running the Nestle New Zealand business, a small market, very well defined, you'd say something that was very controllable in one sense, to South Asia, which was just incredibly dynamic and changing daily. Lots of political, social forces, so many things going on. Even today, of course, that's continuing to evolve. So getting your head around that when you go into those markets fresh. I'd never been to India. I literally landed at the airport, unpacked my bags and went to the office and said, where do we start? So it was a baptism of fire.
Is that standard at an organization like Nestle, where someone who has what appears to be no market experience is put in charge of that market?
Well, I think you take the advantages of Nestle's size and saying they have incredible depth, right? So it wasn't like I inherited a team who'd never seen India before. My job was to lead. And I come back to that earlier comment that I was coming into a market where I had to learn about the consumer, learn about the customer, but most importantly, learn about my people. So I understood what I had in terms of the talent pool and how best to use them, and then how to work with them to build a strategy that we could execute together successfully. So I think some of those fundamental skills are transferable between markets. If you're ready and willing to absorb everything you possibly can from your leadership team and spend the time and the energy to get to know your consumer and your customer. That's the most critical part.
And this resonates. And when I look at my experience, I used to be on the brand side, on the agency side, worked for a bunch of startups.
Yeah.
And I think you come to realize after a while that there are these repeatable elements that are key to success.
Yep.
Even right now, you could probably go into any company, and I think the playbook is very similar. It's just about how do you kind of configure that playbook in the context of the market. I have to imagine that as a leader, CEO, you work with many different functions. When you were working with marketing specifically, were there certain principles or things that you've learned, maybe through mistakes, because I think so much learning is about embracing the mistakes and reflecting on them.
Absolutely.
But was there a moment in your career when something happened and this undeniable truth emerged, something became clear in your mind in the context of marketing that you said, I will never forget about this because this is important for me to remember?
Yeah. Well, I can think way back before I was running a business. I was at that point working in supply chain. As part of being a graduate trainee, you moved around. You got exposed to all different functions. And I was working in supply chain at the time. And Milo is a very well-known brand in the Oceania, Asia region. Not so popular here, but it's a milk modifier. It's a bit like Ovaltine, or you add it to milk.
Yeah.
And it's an extremely popular brand, right? And it was invented in Australia, actually. That's where it found its beginnings. And there's a story in that for knowing your consumer in the product itself. But at a certain point in time, the people who were in charge of Milo as a brand decided that they needed to simplify and reduce the cost of the product.
Okay.
And so there was a key ingredient which they chose to swap out for something that was lower cost, perceived to be identical, right? They convinced themselves this was something the consumer wouldn't even notice. I don't know if they even did any consumer profile testing, to be honest, but they made the change. And it was incredible, the backlash that we had within just a couple of months when that product hit the market. Just the level of reject and consumer complaints that we had just went through the roof. I mean, I was part of a team who was fielding these complaints, was actually even manned the phones for a period of time, taking the calls because they just got overloaded. And the common theme from the consumer was, how dare you do this to my brand? This is my brand. Milo is
so
my
it's
brand.
personal for them.
Absolutely. This is my brand. Like, how dare you, Nestle, do this to my product, my brand? This is mine. I'm third generation. My great-grandfather used to drink this stuff for breakfast. And you make this change without consulting me, and without asking me if I like it or not. You just assume that it's okay. And I guess you've done it because you make the product cheaper. Well, good for you, but I'm not buying it anymore because it's not my product anymore. And I never lost that message. I mean, in the end, they swapped back. They had to go back. It was like a huge apology campaign, and then they relaunched the product. And I think to this day, it remains back at its original recipe. But, that fundamental message of understanding, at a certain point when brands have a strong emotional connect, they own the brands. The consumer owns the brands. We're just the steward of the brand as the manufacturer. And you need to respect their point of view, and you need to understand what it is they value in the product. And if you take it for granted, then you pay a huge price. So that learning has stayed with me forevermore.
So let's talk about this a bit more. I have to imagine that there's times when you introduce a new product, and there are times when you have to be, to your point, a steward of an existing product. When it comes to introduction of a new product, how does one actually nail down this idea of, here are the characteristics of the product that I need to either zoom in on because I need to really get into the head of the consumer and understand what it is that they care about for me to create a match between their needs and what I can actually deliver against those needs?
Well, it comes back to simple things, right? What is the value proposition? Why does the product even exist or intend to exist? Are you there to serve a price point? Are you there to fulfill a key need, a gap in the market for a utility that just doesn't exist today, or something that improves the utility of the product? Or is this an emotional statement? This product represents something that's truly going to have a deep emotional connection with the person. And sometimes you can go in with one intent and end up with another because you're not clear on how you communicate those values and what you stand for. That can be a problem, right? If you send mixed messages. If you're not super clear on it, you're inviting the consumer to take it in 10 different ways. And that can be highly problematic for once you launch. But the validation point, I think, is the key. You have to do your research. You have to talk to the consumer. You have to present them with ideas and understand that sometimes until they've seen the product, they don't know what they want. It's hard particularly when you're introducing new products, it's really difficult to describe to a consumer what you're going to produce for them if they've never seen it, or ask them to tell you what they want if they've never actually sat down and thought about it. You'll get 1,000 different answers. I think it's Henry Ford's famous comment that, if I'd have asked the consumer what they wanted, they would have said faster horses.
For sure.
They wouldn't have said cars. So you do have to do validation work, and you have to test. Once you're in the market, you have to revalidate. Did you actually hit the high points that you were intending to? Did the value proposition resonate? And you have to be prepared to be nimble. Maybe you have to move things. And this is, I think, one of the big challenges with new product launches is that ownership becomes very deep in the organization, right? You go in, you are, emotionally connected to this new product.
And
and you're not prepared to change.
Biases as well?
With all the biases that you go in with, you've seen data, you've come to conclusions, and you've arrived at a decision point of how you're going to launch this product and what this product is. You may or may not have done sufficient validation with the consumer, and you launch. And then sometimes folks just are unwilling to move, right? They're determined that the product must succeed on their terms, even if the consumer is telling them something different.
So you spoke about talking to the consumer.
Yeah.
And in my experience, many marketers, it's almost like we hide. And I look at myself as a marketer, it's easy to hide behind a spreadsheet. It's easy to hide behind numbers. It's easy to hide behind a meeting. And I don't think it's conscious hiding. I know it's not. But it's tough to talk to the consumer, I think. How have you seen that work where it was done successfully? How have you seen these processes play out where there was an actual process of truly dialing in on what is most important?
Yep. So I can give you a few examples, but I'll pick one based around work we did with a very influential marketing brain from the world, Martin Lindstrom. You may or may not have heard of him, but Martin is one of the world's thought leaders in marketing, and I had the pleasure of working with him on a particular project in India, partly to do with a relaunch and partly to do with new product launches. He really focused us on this idea of, okay, you can get data, you can have a look at data, and it can lead to some certain conclusions. They should be treated as hypotheses to be tested. So start by arrive at a shared view of what these hypotheses are in your team, and start with as diverse a range of influences in those hypotheses as you can. So I can tell you in my team, we had everything from production managers, technical team members, field operation team members, legal, finance. We had everyone weigh in on certain hypotheses around the brand. So they brought different dimensions of how to look at the brand. Then we did ethnographic work, and this is where we went to the people. And this is often goes missing, this idea of going and understanding in a true ethnographic study sense, how do people interact with brands? How do they live every day? How do they use the products that we're involved with? Go and observe it, see it firsthand, and understand, do those hypotheses really check out when you go out and talk to people in different parts of the market? Bring it back and test it, and then go back to the market, which we did, and actually try and validate some of those hypotheses to make some decisions about what is most important and does the data validate it. And a live example was we were trying to propose products that met a particular angle of freshness, right? We were selling consumer packaged goods in a market where traditionally people still buy from wet and dry markets every day. They go and buy daily from the street. So there's always this nagging perception that what's in a box on a shelf must be artificial, and just
Makes
by
sense.
default, right? It's a mindset shift for these folks to understand that actually we represent fresh products just like they do, and they're safe. And so we were trying to come up with a point of view of how to actually present that just visually, you know, how to do that. Because also you're dealing with, I think we dealt with something like 17 different languages inside South Asia, just in India, that we had to try and communicate. So visual communication was important.
Understood.
How to do that. So we had a preconceived idea as a cultural bias of what fresh looks like, just in color schemes even, just color palettes.
Yeah.
You know, light green, light blue, you know, it's yellow hues. These are all going to be beautiful examples of how to present fresh.
That makes sense to me.
So we took these color palettes out of the marketplace and we met with mothers and their mother-in-laws who are very influential. That's an observation in its own right, that you can't disrespect the role of the mother-in-law in the background in what finally gets decided as being right or wrong.
Okay.
So we would sit with them in their living rooms and we present color palettes to them and ask them questions about what is fresh
Yes.
for you. And you know what we came out with?
I have no idea.
Bright pink.
Really?
Bright pink.
Why is that?
And, you know, it's a close association culturally with the colors they wear. And, you know, there's deep stories behind how these colors resonate with them. But in the end, it turned out that most often the color that they would associate on pack with something that denoted freshness for them was bright pink. Never in a million years would I have got there, right?
Yes.
Without understanding that from the consumer's point of view. And so when I look back at our dairy business, we had a yogurt there that was on sale. And when you peel back the lid for the strawberry flavor, you almost needed sunglasses. It was that bright pink. And I remember the first time I opened one of these and said, wow, like this looks so artificial.
Yes.
Who would eat this? I had no cultural context for this. If I had just looked at it at face value, I would have outright rejected it. But I came to understand that actually this was a visual signal of freshness, of being natural to the local consumer.
So, you know, two things stand out for me personally from this example. One is, it seems like you went into these studies with a hypothesis in mind.
Yeah, data-driven.
And then you were validating it with data. When I think about these kinds of processes, I would imagine that I actually want to collect data and then come up with a hypothesis. Is one better? Is hypothesis first, data second? Or is it also data and then reading patterns in the data?
Well,
or there isn't right or wrong?
Well, I don't think there's an absolute right or wrong, but if you think about what we did is we had data points coming from our team and from Martin, who we then collated all of that.
Yes.
We stepped back from it and said, what does that tell us? What do we think it's telling us from the data, right? Let's come up with some points of view and let's test them.
Yes.
And then understand, are they truly valid or are we on the wrong track? But I do think today, data is in a way our friend and our foe, right?
Yes.
It's both an easy avenue to demonstrate a point of view, but in any case, you've always got to decide what's important out of the data. You can't always include everything. And I think if you don't externally reference it, if you don't have some point of external validation in that cycle that says, I understand why this is valid and I can speak to it from the consumer's point of view, not from my point of view, then the risk is I'm just using data for data's sake because it's easy, because it's just an easy conclusion to reach. And, you know, so many products still fail today in CPG. And often when you go back and have a look, it can be because of just fundamental decision points that were taken around why the product, what the value proposition was, but that was never really properly tested with the consumer.
I think there's something else here. If I like vision for my brand, I think I would gravitate towards looking at data, finding some patterns, almost creating hypotheses after the fact.
Yeah.
You talked about Henry Ford and I just want a faster horse, right? Classic example.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a classic example of lack of vision. If I actually want to combine as a marketing leader, my experience, my expertise, my point of view, and when I say it could be my leadership team's point of view, right? It could be others. It could be consultants, me, team, research. But I have a hypothesis about what that audience segment needs.
Yep.
And I also am eager to listen to my consumer. And I have to almost combine the two. There has to be almost this paradoxical mix of bias, judgment, opinion,
Yeah.
vision, with actual feedback from the market. It's a marriage of the two that create almost a chance that, in fact, what I can provide and what the market needs will find some unique mix.
Yep, I agree.
What are you hearing?
No, I think that's absolutely true. And I think the other great challenge with all of that is delivering that vision in a very fragmented world today, of getting that message across. The reality is consumers, they like stories. They like storytelling. They like to have a connection to their brands. And I think this is where today the influencers that you see online are able to demonstrate stories in a way that resonate with their cohort, their community. Yes. They find each other. And you can bring that vision to life in a way that they can grab hold of, right? It really resonates for them. Now you've got this sort of multi-tiered media, intergenerational changes of how to reach people. I was just only a couple of weeks ago with my father, and he still today relies on the newspaper every day to gather his facts, right? I don't think my children will ever read a newspaper cover to cover. They don't even watch the news on television anymore. They consume their news through other channels, right?
Yes.
This is how they get it. So the challenge becomes, when you've got a vision, where to deliver it in a way that's going to resonate with the audience that matters to you. So this is where the channel strategy piece comes in. I totally agree with you. You have to have that connection. Where does the vision come from? I think the vision comes from probably learning through a lot of mistakes along the way, right? I think that's another element of how do you come to the vision. Generally, all of these great breakthroughs were not just, shining stars overnight. They're generally a connection of failures along the way of testing different hypotheses and actually narrowing down, getting to this narrow lane of what really resonates, right? From the 10 things they thought they could do down to the one thing that really the vision actually connects.
So you're almost saying that to find that magical match between what I or my team and other stakeholders think is the right way to create an optimal product market fit.
Yeah.
Because I have an idea that something is missing and I can fill that hole. Combining that with actual customer feedback, it almost sounds like it isn't just here's this peg and here's this hole and there's a perfect fit, but maybe it is about several narrow lanes, pun intended, or several pegs and several holes. And through testing, let's say, or experimentation, going to determine that this product, let's say yogurt in India, right, that's pink, or maybe packaging of produce, I assume, that communicates freshness, that this is actually a perfect way to create that value proposition or create a market. I mean, marketing is supposed to be about creating markets, isn't it?
Yeah, it's meeting consumer needs, or in some cases, meeting needs the consumer didn't even know they had, right? That they just didn't understand. So you create new markets, which is entirely possible. If you think about the role of failure, though, I want to underline the importance of failure leading to success.
Yes.
And I think this is...
Which, by the way, if I can interrupt you, especially a large corporation that is a sleeping giant, to your earlier point, that doesn't strike me, especially when you have to produce the packaging, procure the product, right? Put it on the shelf. Like, I'm sorry, but a large corporation that enters a market with 1.5 billion consumers, is there room for failure?
You have to make it. I mean, that's your leadership
How does
role.
it work?
Well, that's where the leader has to stand up and own that. I mean, if I'm in that market, that's my responsibility to give permission to fail, because ultimately that's what is going to lead to greater success. And we had product failures. We had launch.
Can you share an example? Was there a launch where you had a hypothesis as a team, you listened to the market, you went through the right steps, and it still didn't play out?
Yeah, and some of it can be purely execution related. So it can be just related to how you get it to the market.
Understood.
And others can be related to the product dimensions itself. One example we had was we had a cereal business in India, an infant cereal business, very good product. And our hypothesis was that, like, for infants who are growing up, they still have a big challenge from the time they stop, when they're off what we call weaning foods and they're moving to table food.
Yes.
There's this transition point where there's a big nutrition gap. And actually, we had statistical data that demonstrated some kids fall behind in this move, this transitional move. Not as common in a Western society where we have access to better quality foods and different ways of feeding our children. But this was real for us. So we thought we had a product that fitted the bill, and we created a new product extension to our range to deliver it. And it really didn't take off. And it took us a while to try and understand what was missing. Was it they didn't understand the role of the product? They didn't believe it did the job. The children didn't like the taste. And actually, again, this came back to understanding the fine detail of when we talked to the mothers, they said, well, when we make the product and we look at what we make traditionally ourselves, it looks almost too perfect, and it has absolute consistency. There's nothing in the product, there's no body in the product. So we re-engineered all the products, and we introduced these small particulates into the product, which were dried fruit pieces.
Yes.
Right? Brought a little bit of subtle taste, but visually disrupted the product considerably, and the product took off. Absolutely took off, just beyond our wildest expectations. It accelerated dramatically because suddenly in their mind it was seen as more nutritious. It was a better tummy fill. It was more representative of what they would make naturally. It was nutritional advantage, but it was very visual as well. And they would describe back to us how when they make it up, it looks much more like the traditional meals they would consider as being healthy meals for their children. So re-engineering the product, 6 months later, it was an entirely different proposition.
It almost sounds to me that you have then analyzed the problem from multiple dimensions.
Yeah.
Like you said, is it the packaging? Is it the messaging? Is it the actual composition? Is it maybe the placement, right? Maybe it's the price point. There are many different ways to analyze the problem.
Or even how do the doctors perceive it? Because they, in that market, have a big background influencer role.
On the mother and the parent.
On the mother and
father.
parent, right? The pediatrician has a role to play. So even just going back and looking at through their lens,
yes,
did they see a problem with it? Are we not talking to them, and they're delivering a different message to the mother than what we believe we're delivering?
Yeah.
And, of course, we started out with the ambition of we're very science-led. We know exactly what the composition should be based on, what the age group is and what nutritional content they need, which is all fine. But of course, at the end of the day, you're comparing it in a mother's environment to what she thinks traditional food should look like and feel like and what texture it should have. That's part of their perception of what nutrition is.
I do find it very comforting, I guess, that someone like Nestle, again, a large multinational, that you are allowed to go back and tinker with the go-to-market formula and all of its elements, and that you had the permission to actually have a second go at it. It almost feels like you had listened again and you had reimagined your hypotheses.
Yeah.
And that permission to tinker with it ultimately was the unlock to success.
It did.
I'm a little surprised that was okay to do.
Yeah, well, I think it also comes down to having great leadership above me, right?
Interesting.
Had a great leader in Nandu Nankashore. Nandu was the global head of infant nutrition at that time, a very good marketer, a smart brain when it came to the consumer. And he's the type of guy who was open to that as well. He understood that. So it's a function of leadership, right?
Yeah.
To be able to fail, you have to be able to given the space to fail.
Which almost sounds like we're going back to your point from very beginning where you talked about that it was a service, I forget if it was Navy or Army, but there was a gentleman. Army that talked to you about structure and how people operate within structure.
Yep.
So it sounds like there was a structure, but the people that you worked with made a huge difference in your ability to actually turn a failure into success.
Yep.
And again, you listened, right? You guys clearly did your homework in terms of having a hypothesis, listening to the market, gluing it together into a go-to-market strategy.
Yep.
But there was this willingness to sort of rip it apart and rebuild it again.
Yeah. I'm never frightened of failure, Greg, but I'm always frightened that people don't learn from it. I think that's the biggest issue with failure in any business is that the immediate reflex action in business is, all right, whose throat do I choke for the failure, right? I mean, who's responsible for this? I mean, who's responsible is usually a myriad of people, because it usually wasn't one person who made all the decisions. The real question is, how did we end up here? What did we miss? What did we assume that wasn't correct? What data did we rely on that maybe wasn't validated? Or what data did we not bother to get before we made a decision?
You know, this is a bit of a segue, but I think it's important. Many of us are parents, and I realized the other day that I don't, as a father of 3 daughters, I don't actually encourage them enough to fail and to celebrate it.
Yeah.
I do praise them. I think I do a better job of that than in the past. But I realized lately that I need to actually actively encourage them to actively fail.
Yes.
And develop a comfort level with that feeling. Because to your point, yes, like culturally, we don't like failure, right? Mistakes are looked down upon often.
Yeah.
And whether that's my children or in the workplace, if we allowed ourselves to fail more often, like would we learn more often?
Yeah, I mean, it is a problem. I think it's a problem with academia generally now. The academic environment is all geared towards grade inflation and everything has to be 100%.
Yeah.
I never lived in an environment where I grew up in Australia. If you got above 80% in anything, you were Albert Einstein. But today it's sort of like I hear my own kids getting over 100% in something.
Yes.
And I ask myself, well, how is that even, how can you get 110% in something? It doesn't make, it fundamentally doesn't make sense. I agree, this is the challenge of parenting, but I say to my kids when they get less than 100, okay, I sort of care less about the result, but if you got 95, what did you learn about the 5%? Did you go and ask? Did you have a conversation about what it is you got wrong? Because that's the education bit, is right there. It's in the 5%. Other 95, you know it. That's sort of done and dusted. But the 5%, that's where the magic happens, because that's where you're going to learn something.
Now, taking that back to, let's say, North America.
Yeah.
I mean, you were not in a marketing role.
No.
You had marketers reporting to you.
Yes.
Did you see the team that was reporting to you, the marketing team that was reporting to you, this idea of having hypotheses, listening to the market, creating something special, something unique that you felt could resonate in the market?
Yeah.
What did they do well in that context?
Yeah.
And what did you need to push them to be better at?
Yeah. So I had a fabulous marketing team, and they were folks who were deeply emotionally connected to the brand. I mean, it was primarily the Gerber brand, which had been around for a long time in the US.
I mean, who doesn't know Gerber?
And it started with Dan Gerber right out of the gate, going and literally selling the products to the shelf and putting the products on the shelf.
I never knew that. So he was actually formulating.
Yeah,
so there was a gentleman named Gerber.
Yeah,
I didn't know
Gerber,
that.
and in fact, his original residence were the first. And this is, a consumer insight in a way. His wife said to him, he was making, I think, jams and conserves at that time. And his wife, who was at home in the kitchen, feeding these young kids, said, if you can do all that, why don't you do something for children, right? And make some healthy vegetables in a jar that could be sold, because I would buy that to feed our children. Because it's a hassle having to make everything from first principle every single day. And it really did start. And that home still exists. You can go and visit in Grand Rapids, Michigan, the original home of the Gerber family, where the idea for Gerber infant nutrition started. It's still there, right?
I love those stories, by the way.
So that history is right from the get-go. So fast forward to more recent times, one of the great challenges again was children growing up and having the right nutritional choices for busy mums on the go, right? This was a big insight of mums are increasingly feeding their children in a car, right? Sadly, the child's either in the back seat or in the front seat in a baby seat, and they're literally feeding on the run, which is sadly too often the case. So the question was, how do you address that market? And mums inherently feel guilty about it, right? They're trying to balance so many different things in the modern workplace. They're trying to be full-time mum. They're trying to realize their own career ambitions. They're trying to be, a part of their local social network. They're trying to do all of these things and be perfect at all of them. And so part of the marketing insight that came from my team was we have to give permission to mum to be not perfect.
Yes.
But we can help her, right? How do we be mum's helping little hand, if you like, by giving her some positive nutrition choices she can make and feel good about, So it's a no compromise solution, right? It's high quality nutrition from Gerber. It is for on the run. So they literally created this up age category, right? Snacks on the go, which really didn't exist. You had sort of baby food in a jar, and then you had some simple cereals, and then you were straight off to the snack aisle, adult snack aisle, with too much sugar, too much saturated fat, not enough nutritional content. So they were skipping through this nutrition journey. So through these insights of identifying this positive tension, negative tension really for mums, of trying to be everything to everybody, successful, of acknowledging the mother, lifting her up and saying, it's okay, you're not going to be perfect, but there are things that can help you, and we can be a part of the journey. We have a range of products for you now, which we're introducing, which are nutritionally balanced for the age of the child you've got, but they're also convenient. They come in pack formats that you can take in the car. They literally fit in the cup holder, and you can actually feed those snacks and feel okay about it. So the campaign was both functional in these products are nutritionally balanced, but it was also emotional of, hey, we've got your back. We're here to help you, and it's all right. You're already a superhero, and we're going to help make your life a little bit easier, and you don't have to be perfect, but this will get you a long way to helping you down the path.
When we're describing it after the fact, it seems so obvious that, a mom, which parent doesn't want to be perfect and do the best for their children? But how do I turn something that maybe is a little guilt-driven and give someone permission to reimagine that situation, and actually it's okay, you're doing your best, we are here to help.
Yes.
Did that come from research? Was this hypotheses? Was it both? How did you guys actually zoom in on this simple idea that I'm sure wasn't that obvious when you got started?
It did start from research, and like a lot of research, you don't necessarily start with that as your hypothesis, but you end up very quickly going down a junction in the road where a snippet comes out of a conversation and somebody grabs it and says, we need to come back and explore that. Because we've heard that theme in many different ways expressed about mother's guilt, right, of wanting to be the perfect solution, and then asking ourselves, and what's missing? What is it that if they could click their fingers, what things could we fix? We can't fix everything, but there are probably things we can do that will help that move forward. And then, of course, once we had that idea and we sort of validate it with the consumer, it was also talking to the retailers.
Yes.
Because we were talking about them making category space. Real estate is invaluable, as you know, in any supermarket. So to convince a Walmart... I
think it's also expensive to
expensive,
acquire.
Yeah, it's expensive to acquire because it's a competing choice always for space. So to convince a Walmart or a Kroger or a Target that they should create space and create a whole new shopping destination, and then you have to train the consumer to know where to find it and what they're looking for and why they should go down that aisle to find it. So it's a multi-part exercise. I've got to talk to the consumer, got to come with the right product that resonates, got to talk to the customer about where to put it in the store, and then figure out how to tell the consumer where to navigate to find it, because it's something entirely new.
So if I was to summarize this, one of the things that I care about is this clarity around, if I'm obsessed about something that really matters in the context of my role as a marketer, then I have to sacrifice maybe an element of messaging, maybe how I position the product. And by the way, product doesn't have to be CPG, right? This can be a service, this can be a direct-to-consumer product that I'm selling to a direct channel. But I have to be willing to say, I need to stand for this. I need to give myself the permission not to focus on these other elements that maybe aren't that important. And I have to believe that some sort of value will be created as a result. Maybe I don't know yet what that value will be. Maybe it's intangible and intangible, but I believe that it will reveal itself. And what you just said is that this insight, this obsession about there is something deeper here, isn't just about how you guys packaged, was it a small jar, big jar, what color? There's obviously a picture of the baby, right? But it was also about delivery of that product, maybe pricing, that obsession about this product market fit, and there is a gap we need to own, that had multiple cascading almost elements of value. Am I making this up, or
No, it's
is
absolutely
this
true.
resonating?
It's absolutely true. And, again, once you start down that path, you have to be prepared to learn that maybe some of the products don't completely fit, and there either could be a price element to it. It could be a pack format that doesn't quite work in the environment, or it doesn't get used the way you originally anticipated. And so sometimes the consumer takes the product off in its own direction, and you didn't even anticipate that that's how it would be consumed. So you have to learn. You have to be prepared to listen and maybe adapt. Second generation, there'll be some changes. Not everything will fit perfectly.
Yeah.
But the obsession piece is important, because if you try and be all things to all people, generally you're nothing to anybody.
I know, and that's
you dilute the message so much that now it's not clear what you stand for. In some cases, you invite the competitor to come and take that space.
Yes.
They see what you missed, and they hone in on the precise element.
I see. So you're saying almost lack of obsession about owning a niche.
Yeah.
Almost sends a signal to others.
Yes. Well, it's not always
that
the
there
first
is a
mover.
gap for them to fill, because you did not maybe have the courage.
Yes. Yep.
The obsession to actually just be all in and own it.
I mean, it's not always the first mover that wins, Greg. You know, if that was true, then we'd all be using MySpace, right? I mean, sometimes it comes...
Or Friendster.
Yes,
Friendster
exactly.
was also
Friendster,
great,
yeah.
I remember.
So sometimes it comes down to, the first people in do identify the market opportunity, but may not have the courage, or may not have had the focus to really spend their energy on the things that matter, and they diluted their effort. And then the second player in is observing this and saying, you know what, I think if we just chopped off those three things that are really not valuable and just focused on that one thing that is the real insight, we could actually make a better product. So, sometimes you teach the competitor how to play the game, and often you can look back and say, I knew all that, I just didn't act on it, right? They did.
I like sayings, right? I mean, obviously English is my second language. It's been 32 years of learning how to speak English, right? I feel like I'm
still trying to.
Well, I don't think you are, but I definitely feel like I am, right? And one of the phrases I really like, and I think that's what marketing is about, is offense is the best defense. So, if I connect your example to that phrase, when I go in and I have a strong point of view about how I fit into the needs of the consumer, and I make sure that I own that positioning, that is me truly embracing the fact that offense is the best defense, because by being offensive, I am actually defending myself against others who may exploit my maybe lack of conviction about truly wanting to own this space.
Yes. Yeah, well, I mean, the old English saying is, a donkey is a horse designed by a committee, right? It's when you have everybody's input and finally no clear, committed point of view, that you just get the sum of the parts all glued together.
Donkey is a horse designed by a committee.
Yeah, or you often hear, the same sort of thing with a camel.
With your permission, I'm going to add this to my arsenal of quotes.
But there are different takes on the same idea. But it's the principle of, if there isn't not enough conviction in the room and enough, if you like, focus on a final point of view, and you don't all coalesce around it, and you're allowing people to spin off in their own direction, the risk is you do get this massive dilution of effort.
I've worked at, not to be named, but I worked at a couple startups in Manhattan years ago. And that's exactly what it was. It was actually really painful to observe how a startup, which is supposed to be by definition dialed in and clear about who they are and who they're not, how they just very easily screwed that up. And then I listened to your story about, India or North America, whether it's Gerber Life or whether that's a product for children and mothers. And this, what you called sleeping giant, was able to get it right. And the startups that I worked at didn't get it right, probably because they lacked discipline, experience, whatever it is. Maybe they lacked obsession and conviction about what problem I'm solving.
And because it's easy, because there's always new information coming every day, right? And it's easy to be, I guess, attracted to the next shiny object that comes along. And that's why I say information is your friend and your enemy, because you've got to learn how to dissipate or just dissect between the things that matter and the things that don't, because you can't chase every dream, right? And if you don't do that, then you will have failure.
Well, and then it brings us back to using our own judgment and kind of being okay with bringing our bias to this process of figuring out what do I listen to that I believe represents a signal that I am only for some consumers as a brand, but I'm not for everyone, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think, great examples. I think there are many great examples in the world today of what we now look back and say were great breakthroughs, but at the time were the result of fierce conflicts around choices, right? And somebody being fiercely determined to see that choice come to life, whether it's Steve Jobs or others who, he had an obsession around an idea of what he thought, what computing could be and what the future of these consumer-based products could look like. I think I heard the comment made once about describing the iPod at its time. If you had just described it to a consumer, it's a hard drive. You think Sony Walkman was there, had the market. This thing, you don't have any of the flexibility that you have with a tape drive. You can't change tapes. You don't have a forward and reverse the same way the other. It's just a hard drive and a just one small simple interface. It's hard to imagine the consumer would ever have described that to you as what they wanted, but they didn't understand the product, and he was obsessed with delivering that and helping them understand how it would help them once they experienced it. He didn't give up on it. He didn't give up on the idea in the face of a lot of competitive pressure saying it wouldn't work.
Great classic example.
It's just one of those things.
I have two finishing questions.
Sure.
One is AI, right? Just in your experience, and I know this is a passion of yours, one of your many passions. I know racing cars is another passion of yours, if I can disclose it publicly. But the application of AI in this process of creating hypotheses and then getting data to see where there's a bit of a magical fit. Just any thoughts about the role of AI in that process?
Well, obviously AI is with us. It's never going to leave us. It's here to stay in some form or another. I think in my learning process, and I think I learn something new about it every day, is understanding that so much of the success of AI today is still driven by the quality of the data sets that sit behind it. And the level of human validation that's gone on to actually ensure those data sets are truly representative. Because AI in itself can overlearn, it can actually reinforce biases. So it can be a tool of destruction, not just a tool of creation if it's misused. The great fear I have is that people see it as a panacea for everything just because of the letters A and I being put together. It stands for a lot of different things. And still today, those data sets, the qualification of those data sets, the completeness of them, and the unbiased nature of them is still super critical to what they deliver up to you. But on the assumption that all of those things are true and they're in place, then you have at least a great repository of information to assimilate ideas down into a format for you to interrogate, right? For you as a marketer to say, I can fast track a lot of combined learnings and I can put them in front of my team and myself as a fast path to do some of the analysis we were talking about before, much quicker than I could have ever done before, because I can assimilate so much bigger data sets from much more diverse resources to be able to bring a set of ideas to the table. But in my view today, you still need to validate it. You still need to question it and not take it as a given, because the danger is that the AI is only as good as the data sets it's relying on. And the great problem with AI, if you can call it a problem, is nobody has the ability to validate all the data. I mean, it's out there, it's cloud-based. You don't even know where it's coming from. I mean, very few people today, I think, bother on ChatGPT to ask themselves, where did all this data actually come from? Who validated it and what's missing? You just take it, right? So I think today it still has a role in facilitating new ideas and thinking and assimilating data quickly to help you reach conclusions or test hypotheses quicker. But I'm still very much of the mindset of the consumer is still a real human being. They are still going to have their own diverse views that are culturally based and culturally biased and based on all the ethnographic triggers that drive how they live their lives. And you need to learn and understand that. Take what you get from AI to help facilitate and speed that process up and iterate faster, but do not remove yourself from the thinking. And that's the great danger, I think, with AI, that people are going to rely on it almost without critical critical review. And I already say this to my children, whatever you see on a screen is not gospel. It is a starting point for a thought.
Yes.
You need to have your own critical point of view about what you believe about
So
that
it's
thought.
a way to ideate.
It's a way to ideate, and it's a way to assimilate data and gain knowledge that you may have otherwise not have been able to get a perspective on. And it's going to be different by industry. If you think of the medical industry, you and I, if we need medical help, you go to the doctor who you think has the best knowledge base and experience in the specific area that you're interested in. And they may have operated on 2,000 people in a particular geography. But imagine if you could assimilate all the known knowledge medically from every physician who'd worked in that field from around the globe over the last 20 years, and then come up with a range of choices. How much more powerful might that be in making the right choice medically for your condition than relying on one person and their knowledge? I think it's really powerful in that sense.
So thank you for that. And I have a second question.
Sure.
Imagine that you are right now mentoring a promising up-and-coming marketing leader. In the context of everything we spoke about today, what is a lesson or an insight that you would want to share with them to enable them to move up faster on their career journey?
So I think I reshaped the question by saying, I don't know that I can move them faster, and I'm not sure that moving faster is the right answer.
Oh, interesting.
I think that's a mistake in its own right.
Okay.
Of course, we have ambition. We want to move up the ladder. But I would thoroughly encourage any marketer who wants to build a solid grounding to take other roles in the company that might mean sideways moves out of their comfort zone. Go and work in sales. Go and work at the face of where you deal with your customer base. Go and work in the insights team, the people who do the research and actually speak to the consumers. Go and work even in finance roles. Understand how people think about ROI on marketing and how they critically review the work that you're going to bring to them. Take as much of that in as early as you can in your career, because it will give you an incredible understanding of how all of that has to come together to be truly successful as a marketer when you're a leader. It may slow you down initially, but it will immensely prepare you to propel yourself at a later date.
I love that. So to be a better marketer, get outside of your comfort zone, try different things, create a broader, stronger foundation. And maybe you will then discover that maybe you're actually a better salesperson, finance person, and a marketing person, or you'll become a better marketer.
One of the best marketers I work with came from a production background.
Oh, fascinating.
And this gentleman, he shared with me that, look, many times I watch product go down the line and I ask myself, why are they making it like this? I don't understand. And then I would see the product be canned in 6 months' time. And then there was never ever, he said, I never felt like there was a real review process. It just, we stopped making it. And yet, if I asked my own team on my line who see all these products, they could tell you 5 things they thought were wrong with this product. No one ever asked them. But they've been working here for 20 years making products. And they've seen repeated failures. And they could tell you when the product was coming down the line what they didn't like about the product already before it even got out the door and onto a truck. So he said, it's interesting how we don't respect the resources we've got internally and understand the knowledge base we already own. So this is sort of like pre-AI, right? This is the knowledge base that's already in our data set that we don't actually interrogate thoroughly to learn from. So he was a fabulous marketer.
So if you want to become a better marketer, actually experience different roles.
Open your mind.
And get outside of your comfort zone, open your mind, and that will make you stronger.
Much stronger.
Gary Tickle, thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed our time together.
Thank you. Me too. Thanks, Greg.